I hope you guys had a quick break. Is everyone good to go? Yes? Yes? All smiles? All smiles? Yes, yes, good, great. Now, ladies and gents, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. The Hasanah Forum, again, is proudly brought to you by Yayasan Hasanah, the foundation of Khazanah Nasional Berhad. Since our inception in 2015, we have reached over 2.4 million people in Malaysia across over 600 programs that we support on ground. Yes, give it up to Yayasan Hasanah. And working with over 470 partners across our key focus areas. And I think some of our partners are here. Thank you so much for joining this important conversation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about real lasting change, an important aspect to it is the leadership. Who are the leaders behind the wheel? In this session, we particularly talk about courageous leadership. And here we explore courageous leadership as a quality that may not come naturally, but rather can be learned and practiced. But how do we ensure that it's authentic, real? How do we invest then resources towards this end? And how do we attract more leaders into the sector, thus eventually professionalizing the scene? These are the key learnings that we hope to cover in this session. Joining us in this conversation, please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome onto the stage Dr. J. Satrio Tanujojo, CEO of Tanoto Foundation, Professor Tan Sri Dr. Jamilah Mahmud, Executive Director, Sunway Center for Planetary Health, Sunway University Malaysia, Tan Sri Abdul Wahid Omar, Chairman Bursa Malaysia, Datuk Shahira Ahmed Bazari, Trustee and Managing Director Yayasan Hasanah, and of course, moderated by Louise Palford, the CEO of Social Innovation Exchange. A big hand, ladies and gentlemen. With a dialogue titled People and Leadership Nurturing Courageous Leaders. Luis, over to you.
Thank you so much. I am in complete heaven right now. I wish I could be here for hours because this is the most esteemed, amazing panel. And I feel completely privileged to be able to have this conversation with you all. So thank you all for taking the time. You're all busy people, lots to do. And I think the audience has a show in for them. So here we go. If you don't mind, I will address all of these wonderful people in a very familiar way, because we're going to have a conversation about what leadership really means in this sector. So as has been said, I'm Louise. I'm from the Social Innovation Exchange, based in London. We're working globally. And I think one of the things that I'm so excited about this conversation is around how we elevate Asian leadership in the world. This is the topic of the whole conversation, of course, that we're having here. And I think we have these 4 incredible Asian leaders to kick us off. So what we're going to do is we'll move into a more conversational style, but we'll start with just what we're talking about and what we mean by courageous leadership. And I think one of the conversations that we've been having is how important showing leadership in this sector that we're all working really is. Actually, it's much more complex leading in this sector that you will hear from all of these amazing people here. And so we're going to start with you, Satrio. Can you just give us a very short explanation of what courageous leadership means to you?
Thank you, Luis. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you for being here.
In short sentence, I would say that courageous leadership is making a difference for the better of the people. Perhaps 2 stories will tell. I would like to say that Mother Teresa, she saw people dying on the street, and what she did was very courageous, because she took them home, and if they have to die, then they have to die with human dignity. The second example is our own founder, he started the philanthropy before he became billionaire. And he started when he started the business, which was not very normal at that time, 42 years ago in Indonesia. That was already a courageous move. But further than that, 6 years ago, he even transformed the organization, Tanoto Foundation, from a mere donator, if you wish, and he made the decision that to multiple the giving, but then we call it investing, because now we would like to do more impact that we have been discussing in the last 2 days. And now we are in that journey, and I would like to say that that is a courageous leadership. And in fact, for doing what they are doing, I think there are 3 requirements minimum. One is dare to make decision, because without action, making decision to take action, that's the real thing. Secondly is, you know, when you want to take people's life to be in a better situation, then you take risk. So that's number 2, is taking risk. And number 3, you know, when you want to talk about developing people or making people better life, then you need to be able to listen to them, to learn how to do this. And that requires humility. So those are the 3 things that I would like to share. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. And humility, I think, is something that we'll see in the conversation throughout all of your inputs. And we heard about leadership throughout the conversations yesterday. Both of the keynotes that we heard this morning also really focused on the ability of, or the importance of building the capabilities of individuals, not just, you know, thinking about leadership in terms of, or skills and capabilities in terms of the school people went to, but also the skills that they have. And I think humility really talks to that. Shahira, tell us what courageous leadership means to you, other than the fact that you're one of the most courageous leaders I know.
Thank you, Louis, and good morning, everybody. So, yeah, I mean, I will be speaking from the perspective of my experience, at least in the social sector in the last very short 8 years. And I would say that courageous leadership for me is about stepping up and doing the right thing and leading with a yes. Okay, and I'll tell you why. Because you know our world is getting even more complicated. Things are just very tough, navigating ambiguities and all of that. And if we don't say yes, you know, you catalyze a lot of things by doing and learning and taking risks and taking action and then go back on repeat. So I think that has been our journey as we reflected, when we feel like it is the right thing to do. You just step up and do it. I just want to ask, how many of you in the hall are Marvel fans? Almost, yeah. How can you not be, right? Has the superheroes ever said no to save humanity? No matter how daunting it feels? No, right? So, so yeah, a bit of inspiration from the Marvel superheroes, but I think that's the world that we're living in today, in every pockets of reality, whether you're a parent or a leader of an organization or a world leader. Everything looks pretty messy these days. So I just wanted to disrupt and say, you know, instead of saying no, let's lead with a yes. That would be my thing.
I love this. Perfect. Wahid, what does leadership mean to you?
Well, thank you, Luis.
Courageous.
Very similar to Dr. Shahira. Well, to me, it's about stepping up when duty calls, making considered decision, and doing the right thing. Now, I was 37 years old when I was asked to step up to spearhead the turnaround of Group, which was in difficult condition at the point in time. But being young means that you have the ability, the luxury of being courageous, because if you have to fall, you can always pick up the pieces and rebuild your career. Making considered decision, you know, please know that we can only make decisions based on conditions, circumstances that prevail at that point in time. But what is important is you take all those things into consideration and make that decision. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you ponder too much and not make any decision, and that will be bad for your organization. And the third is about doing the right thing. So I think at the end of the day, when you are faced with multiple decision-making options, And once you made the right decision, so to speak, put your hand to the heart and ask yourself, is this the right decision that I'm making? Chances are you'll be guided to make that right decision. Thank you.
If only the world was ruled by these four people, I think we'd be a better place. Dr. Jamila, what does courageous leadership mean to you?
So all of the above, but I think for me, for those who know, I've worked in a multitude of leadership roles, you know, from being a doctor to being a humanitarian to being a leader in a large organizations, from being a leader, you know, supporting government, and now to be a leader in an educational institute. So it really is very contextual, you know, what courage means in those different circumstances. And I would say that courage is not the absence of fear. You know, you would think that, you know, for the work that I did in the humanitarian sector, there are many times when you're confronted with abject fear, right? You're in a war zone, you're being shot at. And the courageous leadership then is to really be able to make the right decision at the critical time that is required. And if the decision is the right one, to be able to follow through. But if the leadership has a bad consequence, right, for the humanitarian sector, it's life and death, how then do you face that situation, and what leadership is required then? Now, but I've been in war zones, I've been shot at, you know, I've had to deal with landmines and everything, but the most difficult leadership journey I've had was being an advisor in government. And you know, the leadership that was required was, I knew I would lose all my political and social capital, well, a lot of it, not all, but, you know, in a very, you know, a very strange environment where, you know, there's so much political instability. But I chose to return and help because I felt it was the right thing to do for the sake of my people, you know, to be able to bring my knowledge and experience and to leave a really good job, you know, outside the country and return home, so that, you know, hopefully our people could come out of the pandemic in a better way and have a better health system as a result. I think that for me personally was the most courageous thing I've ever done. And the other thing, of course, is, you know, to be able to do the right thing at the right time. Sometimes it means making decisions that are unpopular and being able to say things which are also extremely unpalatable to certain quarters, but, you know, always finding your true north, and that, you know, at the end of the day, you know, for me as a believer, you know, I serve my Creator, but most importantly, I serve humanity. So I think these are the things for me that are so important in leadership, and the courage that's required to do that.
Thank you for that, for kicking us off, and thank you all of you for getting this started. I'm going to come to you, Wahid, because one of the many things that you all have in common is that you've worked in many different sectors, and your experience of leadership is wide and varied. But in particular, you, Wahid, you have been a chair of a university, you've been a minister, you've led many companies, the list goes on. Tell us about what leadership means for you when you've been working in all of these different contexts, and how it's been applied in different ways for you.
Well, thanks, Louise. Although I've been around, as you've said, but I've not had the experience of dodging real bullets. Yeah, political bullets, yes, but not real bullets. So, I mean, towards what Tan Sri Jamila had gone through. Now, on my part, perhaps, I mentioned about the first job as a CEO that I had. The other perhaps important element was when I was asked to join the cabinet. I was at a point in time happily running Maybank as a CEO, and when the Prime Minister asked you to join the cabinet, it was a call for national duty. And at that point in time, I was very clear of the purpose of me being in government was to give the government the courage to do the right things. And among other things that the Malaysian government was facing was how to manage our finances sustainably. And the idea was you can bring in someone from the private sector and help to implement policies that are necessary but may not be popular. Because I'm from the private sector, I can afford to be less popular because I don't have to go for elections and get votes and so on. So that's actually within the context of looking at how we can sustain government's finances by addressing fiscal sustainability, fiscal consolidation, and subsidy rationalization. And I think that was actually the time when we implemented the GST, which wasn't popular, but that had to be done, and also work towards rationalizing subsidy and making it more targeted towards the people who deserve them. So that's actually one dimension. Another dimension would be in the civil society space. Now, I must say that I'm privileged to have been invited to join the Board of Trustees of WWF Malaysia. This is the Worldwide Fund for Nature, the Malaysian chapter. So I joined the board 4 years ago, and last year I took on the chairmanship. And in conservation, one of the biggest challenges facing Malaysian conservation is to deal with the biodiversity laws, and in particular, the loss of some of our species. Now, we in Malaysia, we had already lost the Sumatran rhinos in Malaysia. The last one, by the name of Iman, it was extinct in November 2019. And the same fate is befalling our other iconic species, which is the Malayan tiger. We now have less than 150 individuals in the wild, and therefore it will need a whole of nation kind of approach to deal with this. Now, the first step towards dealing with such crisis would be to admit that we have a problem, and that takes courage on the part of the government, on the part of the civil society and the people overall. And when we admitted that there was a problem, that's when we started to look for solutions. And in that respect, the Malaysian government committed to do what they can, providing additional support, protecting the border, putting more boots on the ground to protect the habitat. And on our part, people like WWF and others working together with the authorities to work on various landscapes. And in our case, we worked on the Belum Rainforest Complex. Others would work on the Endau Rumpin in the national parks and so on. And I think the idea would be to have that courage to say that, yes, we have a problem, and then take steps towards dealing with it, and then follow through with execution on the ground. And I think as you work on the ground, there'll be many challenges that you face, but you just have to overcome it one by one. And in the end, I believe we are seeing some of the results in terms of signs of new tigers being bred in the wild. And that's actually quite heartwarming. So, and again, back to that question, yes, it's about taking the courage, having the courage to actually take the right decisions, and working together with every party, collaborative effort, as opposed to you working on your own. Thank you.
This is a real theme, isn't it? The working collaboratively, working together, and recognizing all of the different people who are needed to bring into such complex challenges in the organizations that you're working in. But I think also the other thing, and Jamila, will come to you to pick up on some of these points, because I know you all agree with, I mean, you're not going to disagree because you all have amazing visions of leadership, but you can pick up on each other's points a little bit. Thinking about the number of organizations that you've worked in and how you've moved and what you've seen through all of them. But Jamila, tell us a little bit about what it means when you move on from an organization. And one of the things I was really surprised by and really enjoyed hearing is that on your first day when you move into a new organization, you start thinking about your exit plan. And I think that is a really interesting sign of an amazing leader. So tell us more about that approach.
Yeah, I think, I'm quite known as a builder. I like to build things, and to build things, you have to design your exit. So whenever I start on an initiative, I always already start planning my exit. So it's very clear in my head that I will never stay longer than I should, and that success for me would be to leave an organization stronger than it was when I started. And I've done this with several organizations, with Mercy Malaysia, obviously my baby, many, many years ago. It was a 5-year succession planning, to say I will leave in 2009, in June 2009, exactly 10 years from the time I founded the organization, and therefore to test who in the organization would be able to take it on, taking, sabbatical so that people could step into leadership roles, and I just watched from afar, really allowing people the space to do that. And similarly, whether it's in the UN organizations or in other Red Cross, and even now in the center that I've just started less than 2 years ago, I've already designed my exit. So I think that it's really important in leadership that you want your team to be better than you, and to recognize that as a leader you don't know everything, and to be able to ask for help. And I think Shahira can tell the story of how I reached out to Hasanah to help me, because I'm a medical doctor. What do I know? I'm an obstetrician and gynecologist. I always say the 3 words I use most is push, push, and push, and this is why I get to where I am, right? I'm very, very persistent about pushing, and so that's that's my skill. But what do I know about finance, and what do I know about law? But I realized as a leader I need to fill these gaps in my knowledge, not to be an expert, but at least to know that when something's not right, I can smell it out, right? And then to surround myself with people who have complementary skills or better skills than I have. And I think being a good leader, it's about being able to drop your ego at the door and say that I have to make sure people are better than me. And I think that is where I have invested a lot of my time in. And even now in the university, when I came home to Malaysia in 2020, I set up the center. And I said to myself, this is probably the biggest leadership job I have, because I realized when I was sitting in my cozy job in Geneva, that had I dropped dead at that moment, I looked around and I said, who in Malaysia can take my job tomorrow? And I couldn't really see many people. And I said, I have not done my job to build leaders in Malaysia to be able to work globally in the sectors that I have been working in. And so, at the center that I lead now, leadership development is core to it, and therefore working with students and making sure that when they graduate, they have the skills, they have the knowledge, they have the understanding of the decisions that they make that will impact the planet, that will impact human health, that will impact animal health, and therefore hopefully they become the leaders we need right now, but we may not have, but hopefully in another few years, they will be the leaders that Malaysia has, or the world has.
And this is exactly what you do, Setrio, in your organization, build these kind of leaders.
Yeah, but I would like to comment on what you just said, drop the egos at the door, right? So I think yesterday, people talk about the ecosystem of philanthropy, and one of them also say we need to manage the ecosystem. So I think that's very important. Thank you, Dr. Shamila. And also what you said that, before I enter, I need to design the exit. I always talk to the team in Tanato Foundation is that we have to start everything with the end in mind. So I think that really sounds very good to me. Thank you. Well, leadership development in Tanato Foundation actually is one of our program. As Belinda mentioned before, is that we are very active from the early childhood, basic education, and then the leadership development, where we give scholarship to the tertiary students, to the tertiary education students, the university students. But giving scholarship is only one component. But more than that is we give the structured leadership training. So now, why is it important, and why do we want to do that? A couple of weeks ago, I was asked in a panel discussion, why is it important to empower youth? Okay, that was the question. And I said, I remember when I was in the company and also now in the philanthropy organization, I was in the business before, is that we always talk about succession planning. So succession planning, like what you just said, you know, if something happens to you, then somebody will pick it up. But succession planning for a company is such and such, for an organization such and such, but for a country, it has to start from the very early, how we develop the human capital. And then the training is very important, and then when you are at the tertiary education, you are ready to contribute. And this is where we apply our leadership training. And this is why it's so important, because like what I said, in a country, you need to have good leaders. Maybe I can just give one example. Okay, we have a scholar who just graduated from the university, one of the universities, and then he joined a civil servant troops, if you want, civil servant in the government. But after 1 year, he left, he resigned. And what he did was that he went back to his hometown, because he saw that the farmers in his hometown were not treated properly within the supply chain. So they worked so hard, but they didn't get that much. But the people in between the farmers and the market, that's what they get. So he wanted to fix this, and that's his intention. That's why I call that courageous. He wanted to do things for the good of the people. So that's what he did. He came back home. He created a company, so he's an entrepreneur by himself. And then he fixed that within 2 or 3 years. And because of what he did, then he was then asked to join the legal representative of that area. And now he has been there since 4 years ago, so 1 more year to go, and maybe 5 more years to go. So that's what we want to have from our scholars. So if you ask me, what do I expect to measure? That's what we measure. You know, so what they can do for the better of the others. Now, that's difficult to measure, because that maybe it requires a long time, like Dr. Jamila said. So the way we measure our scholars is that how have they been performing? You know, after all of this leadership training that we gave, is it useful for them? Well, in Indonesia, unfortunately, the graduates from the universities, they found, the people who found jobs 6 months after they graduate is about 68 to 70%. That's not good enough. So, of course, it is not only the leadership training that will prepare them for that, but also the job market, etc., etc. But then we challenged ourselves a few years ago. If our training is any good or any good for the business and for the society, then these people, when they graduate, they need to get jobs. So we set ourselves as above 90%. Well, okay, fortunately, we achieved in the last 2 years at 100%. So that's how we think that our program has been contributing to the scholars and also to the community at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Satrio. Shahira, you're doing something very similar, and it's really embedded in all of your programs at Hasanah to build the next generation of leaders. I wonder whether you could talk a little bit about why it's so important, not just what you're doing, but why it's so important to develop leaders in this sector in Asia and in Malaysia too.
Thank you. Yes, I think capacity building and development and working, whether through scholarships or residencies or actually investing time in learning together, it's long burn, right? Sometimes we get asking, how do you track the success of your scholarship programs? Okay, right? You're trying to build leadership, and leadership comes in so many different ways and forms and ways. And I think that Dr. Amir was talking about standardizing certain kind of, there's no real measurements. And I like what he said. He said, you're serving the machine. And I kind of added to that, because it's like, yeah, you end up serving the machine and not the mission. And you get all tangled up in between because, you're trying to figure out some KPIs, but you are making a difference in the lives of these scholars. And they all have different stories. Actually, they all have different journeys of empowerment and unleashing their personal agency, whatever. It's very different. So, but, we get bogged down with trying to justify that or, or make sense of it. So I think we need to it's important, but, how do you say it? I think on your question on nurturing courageous leadership, honestly, I'm not sure I'm nurturing courageous leadership, but I know a lot of the work that I do in the ground is nurturing my leadership, courage, and urgency. And you're learning a lot, because then you need to, because you're kind of saying, what do you as a leader need to do in enabling that. So for me, I get a lot of inspiration from working with my partners, my team members. When we go down to the ground, the actual individual women and youth and all of these people that we're leading, and that sense of responsibility gets to you, right? And all of us have got different roles to play. And I think for me, it's really about leadership in action. Then and if that inspires anything, then hopefully it trickles down. But you need to put, I guess, your money where your mouth is, in a way, right? And demonstrate that leadership. So in our ecosystem, it's tough. It's complex, it's ambiguous, it's very limited resources. Every time I go down to a project and I just getting to that community, I'm like, you had me at hello or whatever, right? Because just getting there is so it's, they're like rivers, and then we get to the community, and then you want to work and transform the community. So a lot of respect for the work that people are doing on the ground, actually. And so, what can we do to ease that, is what I think about, right? I'm not the expert. I'm enabling my partners to do their job. So that's what we think about every day in YH. How can we make that as easy as possible, as supportive as possible, accountability, transparency, there are all of these things, but where is the sweet spot, I think, is what we are all trying to figure out, right? So we don't get too hard on it, neither do we get too soft with it. So where is the sweet spot with accountability?
I'm going to ask you another question, but I'm also going to remind the audience that we have a Slido available. There's a nice QR code somewhere going to be on your screen. There you go. So scan this QR code to ask questions, and I'll be monitoring them, and I'll weave them into the conversation as much as possible, so that you have the opportunity to be part of this too. So thank you for that. But Shahira, I wonder whether you could just build on what you were just saying in terms of the qualities of leadership. We were having a conversation about this morning, and talk to us about what important qualities you think we need to be building in people.
Okay, yeah. I think a lot of the qualities of courageous leadership is actually probably undervalued. Yeah. So, it's really tough. And then especially as a woman, it's even harder. But, simple things like compassion, listening intently and not, doing an ecosystem. These things are not sexy, but it's important, I think. It's really about making a difference. Listening, and, it's not about the ego, it's compassion. And I think for me, as I reflect, it's not just the value that I brought when I joined the development sector or the social sector. I think it was those things that gave me the runway and the resilience and all of that. It's the EQ component of my leadership rather than my IQ component of my leadership, I'd say. And it's tough. Sometimes it can be quite lonely, pushing for certain things and letting people see. Sometimes it does take time. And so that's why I want to say that, you gotta stay true and know what's your purpose and things like that. And because it can be, you keep second guessing yourself when you're trying to do the right thing, because it's just not so mainstream, and it can be a quite difficult journey. So I think, I listen to everyone, and I agree with everybody if they do feel that way, because sometimes it does feel very difficult pushing through the right conversations and doing the right thing.
Jamila, yeah, please do. But I was just going to say, I love how Satria said humility earlier on, and I think that's really important. We talked about these as feminists, didn't we? But yeah, go ahead, Jamila.
I just recalled a beautiful slide that my friend Anis, who's in the audience, showed the other day. And it's about, if you look at the creation of human beings, right? The first organ that's developed is the heart. And the heart starts beating, and then the neural cord starts developing, and then the brain. So everything starts from the heart, yet when the child is born, everyone focuses on the brain. So we forget that, the hardware is so important, and getting that wired right is really important. Now, I've worked in organizations where they've called a form of leadership. I used to chair Oxfam International, and we use something called feminist leadership. That means the whole strategy and raison d'etre of Oxfam is feminist leadership. So it's about being compassionate, it's about being authentic, it's about the willingness to listen, the willingness to collaborate. Basically, it's feminist qualities. And I'm not saying that only women are good at this, but it's a natural sort of way that women actually lead, whether it's at home or whether it's at the workplace. So I think, embracing those qualities is really, really important. But it has to begin somewhere. I talked about the fetus, has the heart developed, and then later on, people focusing on the brain. So if I can just self-reflect for a moment, my first humanitarian mission was at the age of 9. It was May 13, 1969, at the height of our racial riots in Malaysia. And my parents, I come from mixed parentage, so my mother is Chinese and my father is Malay. My father is a civil servant, was a civil servant, and understands communities really well. My mother is just a housewife who is brilliant. So what he did was he mapped out the entire housing area we were in, and he knew exactly where the female-headed households were, the households that did not have bachelors, and whatever food that he received, his rations, he would put them into bags, and I, as the smallest in the family and the youngest, had to go through the monsoon drains in the area to deliver food to my neighbors. And for me, that was the best humanitarian I ever had. And when I talk about it, I know I can cry, because it was a most beautiful learning, from parents who understood exactly how the hardware had to be developed very, very young. And I think that has lived with me forever, right?
Oh. Well, I must say that's very inspiring. I haven't heard that before, Tan Sri. So thank you for sharing that. Now, if I may expand the qualities you talk about as being a good leader into the broader context of organizational sustainability. Now, oftentimes you meet a leader who says, look, I've done well. When I was there, the company did very well. But after I left, the company went down. Well, I guess if that's been the situation, I'm afraid you've been a failed leader, because you have not developed your successes to make sure that your organization will sustain beyond your departure. And to me, among many things, there are 3 prerequisites for an organizational sustainability. Number 1, you need to pick the right leader for your organization. And what are the qualities? Well, many. I'll just focus on the top 3. It's about having integrity, competence, and humility. Integrity, as you know, is about doing the right thing when no one's watching. Competence is about having the right skills and knowledge to do the job well, and that means continuous learning as well, to make sure you upgrade your knowledge. And the third element is probably the least spoken about, humility. And humility is about treating people with mutual respect. It's about staying grounded to your roots, and it's about knowing that we all live in this world for a greater purpose in life rather than for our self-interest. And humility is also about knowing that we don't know everything, and we need teamwork in order to succeed. So if you have integrity, competence, and humility, I think you go a long way. The second part is about developing the talent development and succession planning program, as what we discussed. Make sure that you identify what are the critical positions, and for each one, identify who are the potential successors for those roles, and what would be the intervention required to enable that person to succeed the incumbent. And together with that comes the element of the need to strike the right balance between internal promotion and external hire. And I think oftentimes you may end up with one organization focusing purely on internal talent without bringing fresh talent from outside. What will happen is that after 4 decades or 5 decades, that organization can become very insular and they think they're always the best. Bringing in someone from outside from time to time will help refresh that organization, and I think that's actually healthy. And the third one is about the need to embrace diversity. I always believe in diversity as a source of strength for any organization, not just about gender diversity, but ethnicity, background, qualification, experience, and so on. And I think you can see that organizations that embrace diversity in their management team and in the board will tend to perform far better and more sustainability in the longer run. Thank you.
I'm going to ask you one more question, then I'm going to go to you, Satrio. There are so many questions coming in, which is great. And one of them is about building teams, and how do you build teams? That leaders are not just you, it's about building leadership in your organizations. And so can you just talk a little bit, building on what you've done? I mean, you've built teams in so many different types of organizations. So how do you build teams and alliances that can also lead with you?
Well, thank you. Building teams means that you must recognize that you don't want to have people from the same mold as your team members. They must come from a diverse background. So, for example, at Maybank, one of the things which we recognize that Maybank was a good commercial bank and retail bank, but we were not doing as great as CIMB when it comes to investment banking. So that was one key component that was missing. And we then actually brought in new team members, experts in investment banking. And as it happens, it was the Binafakir team, made up of Datuk Faisal, who's Khazanah's MD now, together with Danny. So they then helped build the investment banking team. And plus, we also had other people with international background. At the point in time, we needed someone who was exposed to the Indonesian market. Pak Satrio, Maybank had acquired BII or BEE at that point in time. So we needed someone, so we brought in Datuk Farid Alias. So, and then later, Tengku Zafrul was brought in, working together with the internal team who are experts already in retail banking. So we then had a very cohesive team that would complement each other. And such that we then supplement them with the requisite leadership training, such that whenever someone leaves, there's enough people internally to step up, I would say. So, for example, when I went to join the government, and after the board decided to appoint Datuk Farid as the CEO, and immediately CIMB actually poached Tengku Zafrul, and RHB poached Datuk Karasaleh. But that's okay, because below them, there were other people being developed who can actually step up and rise to the occasion, so to speak. So again, diversity, and making sure that you don't have people from the same background, even same school, same university, same state in that context. That's actually going to be very, very helpful in building up a cohesive team.
It's a great question for you. You say whatever you're going to say anyway, but also, could you also answer the question about how we make leadership less inclusive and elite in the way that we were
okay, leadership,
building on this?
actually, sometimes we simplify, you need to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Leadership to me is a lifelong journey. It's a lifelong learning. You fail or you fall, and then you stand up again, you learn something, you keep and you continue to learn. So sometimes we try to simplify it, but I would like to suggest that we look at it as a lifelong journey, lifelong learning. And this is why also in our training to the scholars, we divide into three big areas. One is a leader needs to know who she or he is. It's a self-awareness. So our training is 7 to 8 semesters, so it's a structured training. So self-awareness is the first 18 months, and then after that, the next 18 months is how to lead others. So lead self, and then lead others. Lead self, including the self-awareness. And then the last semester is basically on how to prepare yourself for your career. So that's how we train. Now, if I look back at how I manage or I lead my team, I always have these 8 points, but I'm not going to elaborate the 8 points because then it will take 2 hours, right? So the first 2 points that I said is, number one is all my managers, all my leaders, they must be people leaders. So that relates to what you said, is compassion, is with the heart, because when you talk about people, it's not only the head, but it's also the heart. You know, sometimes we say the head, the heart, and the hands, right? So basically, it's everything. So when you talk about people, and secondly, number two, I always said that you are in this job is not for the title, it's not for, therefore it's not for your entitlement, but it is really to serve. It is really your actions that counts. It is really your contribution that counts. It's not your seat, you know, your seat or your office or how big your office is, but it's your contribution. Those are the 2 points that out of my 8 points. I'm not going to elaborate the 8 points, okay? Now, I just want to share one thing which is very important in my experience when I was the CEO of one company in China. One day I was so angry, okay? I was so frustrated, and I shouted on the phone, I break the phone, etc., etc. You know, I did what normally we should not do. And then I left the room because then I need to go to the restroom. And my assistant, she went to my office, and then she wrote on my whiteboard, and she draw a mountain, and then she draw a man on top of the mountain, and she wrote there, when you are at the top of the mountain, it can be very, very, very cold. So basically, it says that, you know, when you're at the top of the organization, you know, you can be very alone. You may not be lonely, but you are alone sometimes. So that's just to share my experience. Thank you.
Well, actually, one of the questions was about how do you combat the loneliness as a leader when you're at the top of the organization. So thank you for mentioning that. But build on that a little bit for us, And Shahira, I'll come to you on that point as well, because you mentioned it.
Maybe I just mentioned a couple of sentences, and then maybe Dato' Shahira can help me here. Basically, there's a difference between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is, you know, lonely, you feel lonely, but I don't think a leader should be lonely. I think we should really create network, we should create friends, you know, and now with the technology, it's a phone call away, and then also your neighbors, etc. But aloneness, you know, it can happen, because when you make a decision, that's also being courageous. Being courageous leader, your decision may not be popular, but you are alone then. But then you need to live with that aloneness. And, you know, it's a part of the job. That's your service. That's the way I see it. Maybe Dato' Shahira, please help me here, you know.
I'm still thinking, but yes, so I'm just thinking about all of the strategies we employ when we are alone. I sometimes joke with my team when we need to break bad news. We always say, who's going to be the good cop and who's going to be the bad cop in this decision making, and we kind of share that together. I do agree. Sometimes we do need to make those tough decisions, and the reason for those tough decisions needs to trickle down, and sometimes we don't do that very well, and that creates some issues in the system in a way, right? But and for me, maybe I'll share, you know, you have your networks of people, you know, it's like your tribe that you really need to de-stress, you need to be in an environment where you can just be yourself, expose your vulnerabilities, just talk it out, you know, and I'm sure all of us have our tribes that we go back to and talk about it. And I think that helps a lot, because oftentimes, depending on the gravity or the seriousness of your roles, I mean, Tan Sri Wahid and Tan Sri Jamila, in their positions, I'm sure it gets even more complex in some of the issues you've got to deal with, and you can't talk about it a lot with too many people. So I think that is my kind of coping mechanism when it does get alone, not really lonely, but can be quite tough. And I think those are the kind of things. And I wanted to just pick up Tan Sri Wahid's point on diversity in the organization. I think for YH, and when I reflect, I think we're quite lucky because we have a diverse pool of talent. We have a good pool of talent from the development sector. We have a good pool of talent from the corporate sector, academia, some that came from management consulting. I think that's the sort of secret source of success in a way, because we are constantly challenging and asking different questions, and that's enabling us to think outside the box. Whereas my previous job, Procter & Gamble, we used to call ourselves proctoids because it is about hiring from within, but every now and then they bring in mid-career hires. So I think that the diversity is going to be quite important. And for us, I think when I started leading YH, we actually didn't have any templates. Like, how do I create succession planning in this sector? What does the job evaluations look like in this sector? Like, how do we benchmark ourselves in terms of, you were talking about professionalizing the social sector. How do we pay for these talents, knowing how complex this piece of work is, and the kind of responsibility in the social sector is a little bit different. And I think I can speak on the funder's perspective as well, because now you're distributing public money. So the concept of responsibility and the Malay word to it is amanah is very different. It's a different kind of burden to your P&L and your usual P&L equally. So I think we are on that journey to develop this. I always tell my team, you guys can be the HR for non-profit, finance for non-profit, legal for non-profit. What does it look like? It's a lot of learning and understanding and developing those templates actually for our ecosystem.
Loneliness and aloneness is quite common as a leader. I think we have to confront that. And there will be times that will happen. But my first piece of advice is, number one, you have to be self-aware. And I think many leaders think they have to be strong all the time. And that's not true. We need to be more self-aware. There will be moments of weakness that we need to find ways to counter. I can give you a couple of examples. One is obviously the most terrifying thing that happened was being shot at in Iraq, and to lose 2 staff then was horrible. I wish I was shot rather than my staff got killed, right? And I think that took a heavy toll on me in terms of, what leadership now do I have to exert to come out of this? Not just the fact that you have to confront the tragedies, but also your personal sense of failure and, all the things that come with it. And, when you know that everything you did was not wrong, it's just bad luck and all sorts of things that happen. And I think the best thing I did was actually get professional help. I actually got a psychiatrist to sit with me. I offered that to my team as well, and help me through this very difficult time. And I think being self-aware is so important, especially when you're confronted with these kinds of situations, which I pray to God that no one else will ever be able to face. Unfortunately, it's happening now a lot in the humanitarian sector. The second thing is finding that circle that you can trust, that that you can fall back to. The tribe. You can see Shahira and I are wearing very same design, right? So we're part of the tribe that may not be in the job that you're in, but you feel safe with, and you can expose all your vulnerabilities to. The third thing I learned very beautifully was in 2013. I was given quite a big award. And there was a documentary being made very quietly, without my knowledge. They interviewed people. And in one of the interviews, my then CEO, Shireen, when I was leading, I don't know whether she's here, she actually said something like, we wouldn't go to bed until we knew she was rested, because she's continually working out there. And, we want to make sure we're here for her. I mean, you're not alone. You may not be physically with someone, but the emotional bond between you and your team is always there, right? That they're rooting for you. They're there with you all the time, in spirit, and everything else. I think, being a leader, we are very human, and we need that human connection. I think that's really important. Your team must really believe in what we're all doing together, right? And therefore, you build that internal tribe as well, that sense of purpose. And I think that's very important in leadership.
I love that. And I think one of the questions that I thought was really nice was, do you always have to be courageous to be a leader? Definitions are interesting, but I think what you just shared is real humility as a leader, and knowing when things are hard, and knowing when to get help, and knowing the value of your teams and those things. Please don't be alarmed by this. It's incorrect. This is saying stop. And I'm going to ignore that for a minute because I think we have a few more minutes, so we'll carry on. I am going to ask you as we start to wrap up, even though I'd prefer not to because I think we're just getting into the exciting stuff here. But before we do a kind of wrap-up questions, I just wonder whether, and a couple of people have asked this, leadership around the hard issues, whether it's around inequality or whether it's around race or gender or whether it's around the big issues that you're all working on, climate, SDGs, I mean, you're trying to bring you've spent a lot of time bringing corporates into thinking differently about ESG and social leadership. These are hard things. So take whichever hard issue that you're working on and thinking about, and you just share a little bit about how you lead when things are really tough, on tough issues. And I feel like such Wahid.
Well, thank you.
You shared a little bit already about the experiences you've had, but just love a little bit more in there.
Well, perhaps two aspects on difficult decisions. I think for me, the most difficult decision ever that I've had to make has always been about people. Yeah. And how do you decide whether a person should be part of your team or should be separated? How much time should you give him the opportunity? And once you decided that he's probably not going to make it, how do you part with him in a fair manner? Yeah. So I mean, I always struggle with that, and the only way to do it would be to give that person the benefit of the doubt, probably a bit more time than what you normally give to other people, to make sure that you support him to be part of your team. But if after giving him 6 months or a year, then he's not going to make it, then have that difficult conversation with that person to say, look, okay, things are not working out, and therefore work out a reasonable separation package. But having said that, whatever it is, no matter how fair you try to be, it is always difficult, and you always get blamed for something. And to me, I always struggle with that. So that's the difficulty that I've always faced from time to time.
Thanks for sharing
Now,
that.
the other thing is actually, the other dimension is actually, make no mistake, we don't know everything, right? So you spoke about the ESG journey. So at Bursa Malaysia, we want to encourage all the companies to embark on this journey. And we know that there must be a high level of comprehension for people to be able to deliver. But having said that, we're all learning as we go along. So being constructive, being helpful, hand-holding the PLCs towards the journey is actually very important. And therefore, not to overly take a hard stand. And this is where you provide that space for the PLCs, give them appropriate timeline for them to be able to grasp the issue and then comply. So for the smaller companies, obviously they need more time, and for the bigger companies, they have more resources, then there'll be shorter time frame for them. But at all stages, you'll be there to actually work with them and guide them.
Thank you. Satri, I'm going to go to you, but I'm also just going to say, so I rather like the Hasanah Forum a lot. I love working with Shahira and her colleagues at Yayasan Hasanah, and I don't want to get myself fired by going far too late over. So what we're going to do is, we're going to go to, because I'd like to come back, we're going to go to you, Satria, and then what I'll do is I'll just work down the panel. I'm going to ask you all for a kind of final thing that you'd like to offer.
No,
So,
I just want
but
to
go
put a
ahead,
different
please.
perspective on the hard part, is that, you know, as a philanthropy organization, very often we can say, I help you, I could donate this, and that put the beneficiary as the object. And I learned something very important 5 years ago when I joined the philanthropy world, is that what we do actually is not that we treat them as an object, but they are the subject, that we work together with the subject to make their life better. I think that will be a different perspective. That is also, inside that is a humility, that we see you as the same as me, and then let's work together to make life better. So that's the hard part.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. Actually, whilst you have the mic, tell us, Satrio, tell everyone, in your final minute, what offering you have for people going out of this conversation about how we build this next generation.
Well, I would like to come back to your the first question, which is what is the, what do you call that? The courageous leadership, right? Which is also with the theme is for justice, also for the for Hasanah. So I come back to what I said before. You need three things. Right? Number one is that you need to dare to make decisions. But then, what kind of decision? You need to stay grounded with the values you live with. So stay grounded with the values. And then number two, I said that, okay, we need to take risk. That means what? That means that you need to always enlarge your sphere of influence. Take risk. So young leaders, go and enlarge your spheres of influence and take risk. And I say number three is be humble, right? Be humble, what does it mean? That means that, okay, I just said how to be humble there, but also is to keep learning, because being humble is to keep learning, because continuous learning is one of the attitude of humility. And for those who are afraid to step up, please step up, because do little things with your big hearts. That's important. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Your last 1 minute.
Oh, my last 1 minute.
What would you like to leave everyone with?
I think what I want to share with you is that, throughout my leadership journey, there's one thing that I have come to realize, which is now very important to me, is that I try to think 20 years down the road. So I look at, what is it that we're going to face 10, 20 years down the road, and therefore what kind of institutions, what kind of leadership is required to build, that new generation of leadership to face that future that we have. So my advice is, yes, all these things that I mentioned are important, empathy, integrity, and all that, but foresight, I think is very, very important in today's world. We're living in an increasingly, what we call an uncertainty complex, and it requires us to really start employing foresight to look at, how do we prepare for that future? And I think leaders today need to start preparing for that future as well.
Thank you for that. I couldn't agree more. I think one of the things that's really important is to imagine good futures for us, not the end of the world as we tend to a lot. This is why we need Marvel.
Well, thank you, Luis. Perhaps before I get to the last minute, a word of thanks to Dr. Shaira and Tan Sri Jamila for developing future leaders. So the government has just set up My SDG Foundation last year, and the idea is actually to come up with programs that will help to deal with some of the communities that may have been left behind in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. So make no mistake, the primary responsibility is actually with the nation as a whole, but there may be gaps. So stateless people, migrant communities, and so on, that will need help. And this is the foundation that she set up to deal with it, working together with United Nations officers. And so the first step would be to hire the right talent, and the CEO that we are hiring is someone trained by Tan Sri Jamila and Datuk Shaira. So thank you for that. So Anita, welcome on board from 1st of July. So if I may, lots of work for her for sure. So back to my last minute, maybe three things, my final thoughts on leadership. One, I think sustainable leaders are those who believe in purpose, do good, inshallah, you'll gain barakah, blessing, and you'll be successful. Secondly, remember the 3 prerequisites of being a good and effective leader: integrity, competence, and humility. And the third is for any leader to be successful, working hard and working smart is important. So I think you can't work hard without being smart, and likewise, you can't just work smart without putting in the hours and so on. When you combine working hard and working smart together with your team members, I think, inshallah, you'll be successful. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And Shahira, you get a little bit longer because you're the reason that we're all here together. So go ahead.
Okay, so since this is also the final session for the Hasanah Forum, I thought maybe thank you so much to all of the panelists and all of the speakers. Please give them all a round of applause. I think the Hasanah Forum has been designed and very, very properly curated to really dig out the real issues and get deeper into the conversations, and I hope you did feel that you were learning something, so I really wanted to say that. And your question was on the closing. Okay, so
what are you going to leave people with?
Yeah, so there's so many things, right? And so many, we've covered so many bases. And if I will speak from the sector that I represent and the philanthropic sector that I represent. There's so many things that we could do. You heard this morning from the impact investment leaders, the whole model of working together, and I think that's really the reason why we partnered with AVPN to bring this conversation, to mesh all of this up and let the different types of capital actually explore the opportunities and potential for collaboration. And I hope that we have sparked something. And obviously Malaysia with, I don't know, what is it now, 35 million people? That's the size of Jakarta. But, you can innovate in this market. And there's a lot that we could catalyze for the region to learn. And we've got very good talents in this country to pull this off. And so I'm really very hopeful, and I think if there's any ROI that would come from this partnership with AVPN, I think that's what it's going to be, and I'm really looking forward to that. And then coming back to our topic, I suppose, one is I always don't let perfection be the enemy of good, because in our sector, you can't quite figure out poverty, you can't quite figure out environmental sustainability where you could see the end. We are today also on the shoulders of so many of others that have worked on poverty, and we're learning. It's continuous learning. So I've always said, don't let perfection be the enemy of good. And that's why I'm a big believer of leading with a yes, because we learn as we do, and we get better. And what's the worst thing? We fail, and we only get stronger with failure. So I think that, I think the other thing is really on, this sector talks a lot about collaboration. Collaboration, common sense, sounds like a no-brainer, but it is actually very tough. There's actually a lot of nuance in collaboration. I think one of the things around the belief that behind, this is also a Malay proverb, it says bersangka baik, right? So it says, you must believe that behind every behavior, there's positive intentions. So if you go to the platform with that, I think collaboration can be a little bit easier, and the ego mechanisms can be better managed. So I think that's the second one. So lead with a yes, have good, always believe that the other person have also good intentions. What was my last one? I think for the young, I think you had a question, and I think the youngsters, because they're so empowered now, right? They've got a lot of resources. We talk about challenging the status quo is always something that is very fancy and they want to do, and I think you should continue to do that. And one of the things that I've learned is that you want to challenge the status quo, you need to challenge it with knowledge, with experience, and with humility. Then I think we are moving the needle. And unless you if you don't have these ingredients, you're actually giving people like us a very tough time doing our job, because we need to build that credibility when we go out there. And credibility comes with experience, with knowledge, and with humility. So yeah, I'll leave you with that for now.
I mean, I think that's amazing, and I think that really sums up the conversation. Challenging the status quo with knowledge, experience, and humility is something that has come up in everything that you said, so thank you for leaving us with that. I'll certainly take that back. I continue to do my best in the world to tell everyone how amazing Malaysia is. I think, as you said, incredible people, incredible talent, really good experiences, a complete best test bed, as you say, for innovation. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to have a conversation with you, incredible leaders here, and for sharing all of your humble opinions about what it is to be leaders in all of the sectors and all of the experience you've worked with. Can we give them all a big hand and say thank you for their honesty and openness? Thank you to the Hasanah Forum for organising so many incredible sessions. Thank you, Shahira.
And that was it. Thank you so much. We'd like to have a group photo with everyone now. To our moderator and panelists, let's have a group photo. Such incredibly, deeply personal sharing. Really appreciate that. And with that, a minor announcement, ladies and gentlemen. If you are joining the Inspirate session will take place at around 1 p.m. So there's a slight time change.